He thought he was just helping a stranded woman in the storm. But the next day, when a Black Hawk helicopter followed his van, he realized he had rescued someone far more important than he ever imagined. The rain poured down in thick sheets, turning the empty highway into a blur of darkness and flashing lightning. Daniel Evans gripped the steering wheel of his old van, squinting through the windshield. The storm had rolled in faster than expected, and he was still miles away from home. Then, his headlights caught something up ahead. A car sat on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking, and next to it, a woman, soaked to the bone, waving her arms. Daniel slowed down, pulling over beside her. As he rolled down his window, she rushed toward him, her breath visible in the freezing air. "Please, can you help me? My car won't start and my phone is dead." Daniel hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Get in. This storm's getting worse." The woman exhaled in relief, quickly climbing into the van. Her clothes were drenched, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she murmured, brushing wet hair from her face. Daniel glanced at her. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite place. She didn't look like an ordinary traveler. Her clothes, her posture. She seemed important. But he didn't ask questions. He just drove. By the time they reached town, the storm had calmed. He pulled into a small roadside motel, handing her a spare jacket. "You'll be safe here." She looked at him, eyes filled with something unreadable. "You have no idea what you've done for me." Before he could ask what she meant, she smiled slightly. "I won't forget this." And with that, she disappeared into the motel. Daniel shrugged it off and drove home. Just another good deed, nothing more. Or so he thought. Because the next morning, as he pulled out of his driveway, the ground rumbled. A deafening roar filled the sky. Daniel glanced in his rearview mirror, and his stomach dropped. A Black Hawk helicopter was following his van, and it was heading straight for him. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his heart pounding. A Black Hawk helicopter? Following him? This had to be some kind of mistake. He was just a regular guy. But as he pulled onto the main road, the helicopter kept pace, its powerful rotors slicing through the morning air. They weren't just passing by, they were tracking him. Then his phone buzzed, an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A deep, authoritative voice came through the line. "Mr. Evans, we need you to pull over immediately." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Who is this?" A pause. Then, "Let's just say the woman you helped last night is someone very important, and we need to talk." Daniel's mind raced. Who was she? A government agent? A fugitive? The helicopter circled lower, kicking up dust. Daniel exhaled sharply, pulling his van onto the side of the road. Whatever was happening, there was no running from it now. Moments later, a convoy of black SUVs appeared over the hill, speeding straight toward him. Daniel swallowed hard. His ordinary life had just taken a very unexpected turn. Daniel watched as the black SUVs skidded to a stop around him, surrounding his van. Before he could even process what was happening, the doors flew open, and armed men in tactical gear stepped out. His heart pounded. Who the hell had he picked up last night? One of the men, clearly in charge, walked toward him. He wasn't dressed like the others. No tactical gear, just a sharp black suit and an unreadable expression. Daniel slowly rolled down his window. Can I help you?" The man's piercing gaze locked onto him. "Step out of the vehicle, Mr. Evans." Daniel hesitated. "Look, if this is about that woman I helped—" The man's expression didn't change. "Out, now." Daniel swallowed hard and did as he was told. The moment his feet hit the ground, everything felt even more surreal. The Black Hawk helicopter hovered nearby, engines roaring. The armed men stood stiff, their eyes scanning the area as if expecting an ambush. And then, the back door of one of the SUVs opened. Daniel's breath caught as the woman from last night stepped out. Except now she wasn't just a stranded traveler in the rain. She was flanked by two heavily armed guards, wearing a crisp suit, her presence commanding. She walked toward him, a small smirk tugging at her lips. "I told you I wouldn't forget what you did for me." Daniel blinked. "Okay, can someone tell me what's going on?" The man in the suit finally spoke again. "Mr. Evans, meet President Elizabeth Monroe." Daniel's jaw nearly hit the pavement. "President?" His brain scrambled for an explanation. "Wait, you mean, like, as in the leader of the country, that kind of president?" The woman, President Monroe, chuckled. "That would be the one." Daniel stared at her, completely stunned. He had rescued the President of the United States, and he had no idea. The man in the suit stepped closer. "Mr. Evans, we have a lot to discuss." Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. "Yeah, no kidding. Because his life, it would never be the same again." Daniel rubbed his temples, still trying to process what was happening. The President. He had picked up the actual President of the United States in the middle of a storm and had no idea. "Okay," he said slowly. "Can someone please explain why the leader of the free world was stranded on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere?" President Monroe smiled. "That's classified." Daniel blinked. "You're joking, right?" The man in the suit, who Daniel assumed was some kind of high-ranking security official, stepped forward. "Mr. Evans, what you did last night may have saved the President's life. We had a security breach and she was separated from her convoy. If you hadn't stopped to help, she could have been in serious danger." Daniel exhaled. "I just thought I was helping someone in trouble. I didn't exactly sign up for all of this." He gestured toward the Black Hawk, the SUVs, and the armed agents surrounding him. President Monroe chuckled. "And that's exactly why we're here." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" The suited man continued. "The President doesn't take personal debts lightly. She wanted to meet you in person to thank you. And—" He glanced at Monroe, who nodded. She stepped closer, looking him straight in the eye. "I need people like you." Mr. Evans. Daniel's stomach twisted. "People like me," she smiled. "People who do the right thing, even when no one's watching." Daniel let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "So, what? You want to hire me?" The security officer smirked. "Not exactly. We're offering you something bigger." President Monroe's eyes gleamed. "How would you like to work for the White House?" Daniel's heart nearly stopped. Work for the White House? He had been a regular guy just driving home, just trying to get through life. Now, the most powerful woman in the world was offering him a job? His pulse pounded. "You're serious?" Monroe grinned. "Very." Daniel looked at the security detail, the helicopter, the armed guards, and then back at the President. His life had changed the moment he pulled over to help her. And now, it was about to change forever. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and nodded. "Tell me more." The moment Daniel said those 3 words, everything shifted. President Monroe exchanged a satisfied glance with the man in the suit, who nodded and stepped forward. "Follow us." Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second, then exhaled and fell in step beside them. What else was he supposed to do? Say no to the President? They led him toward one of the black SUVs. The door opened and Monroe gestured for him to get in. "Buckle up, Mr. Evans. This conversation is better had somewhere more secure." Daniel slid into the leather seat, still feeling like he was in some kind of movie. The moment the door shut, the convoy moved, the Black Hawk lifting off to follow. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Monroe turned to him. "You asked why I was stranded last night," she said. "I told you it was classified." Daniel nodded. "Right, I remember." She smirked. "Well, let's just say you're about to get clearance." Daniel swallowed. "Clearance?" The suited man, who Daniel now assumed was some kind of top-level intelligence officer, handed him a folder. It was thick, stamped, confidential. Daniel glanced at it, then back at Monroe. "I'm just a guy who runs a repair shop. Why would I need clearance for anything?" Monroe leaned forward, her expression serious now. "Because last night wasn't an accident, Daniel." His stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She exhaled. "Someone wanted me off the grid, separated, vulnerable." She tapped the folder. "And we believe whoever it was is someone close to me." Daniel's breath hitched. "An inside job?" Monroe nodded as if reading his mind. "Exactly. And that's where you come in." Daniel blinked. "Me?" The intelligence officer finally spoke. "You're an outsider, Mr. Evans. You have no ties to Washington, no connection to political players. That makes you valuable. We need someone we can trust, someone who sees things from the outside." Monroe's gaze locked onto his. "We need you to help us find out who tried to take me out of the picture." Daniel stared at them, his pulse pounding. This was insane. He was a mechanic, not a spy, not an agent. But as he sat there, gripping the classified folder in his hands, he realized something. His life had already changed. There was no going back. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to see how deep the rabbit hole went. He took a deep breath and met Monroe's gaze. "I'm in." The moment Daniel said the words, the air inside the SUV shifted. President Monroe exchanged a glance with the intelligence officer, who gave a small nod. They had just recruited him. Daniel tightened his grip on the classified folder. Less than 24 hours ago, he was just a guy trying to get home in a storm. Now he was involved in something far bigger than himself. Monroe leaned back. "Good choice, Mr. Evans. But before we go any further, you need to understand something. This won't be easy." Daniel exhaled. "Yeah, I kind of figured that when a Black Hawk started following me." The intelligence officer, who still hadn't given his name, chuckled. "Smart man. But let's make something clear. You're not a trained agent. You have no security clearance. Officially, you don't exist in this operation." Daniel frowned. "So what exactly do you need me to do?" Monroe tapped the folder in his hands. "Inside is everything we know about the people who were supposed to protect me that night. My security detail, my closest advisors, my staff." She held his gaze. "One of them betrayed me." Daniel's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a random attack. It was someone on the inside. Monroe continued. "You have fresh eyes. You don't know these people. You're not clouded by politics or loyalties. We need you to look at everything, from an outsider's perspective, and tell us what stands out." Daniel hesitated, then slowly opened the folder. Names, photos, reports, timelines. He scanned the pages, his mind shifting into problem-solving mode. It was like working on an engine, except instead of fixing a car, he was trying to figure out who tried to take out the most powerful woman in the country. One name caught his eye. He frowned. "This guy, James Holloway, says he's been your chief of security for 5 years, but there's a gap in his records before that." Monroe leaned forward. "What kind of gap?" Daniel flipped through the pages. "No employment history. No records of where he was before joining your team. It's like he just appeared." The intelligence officer's expression darkened. "That's not possible. We vet everyone thoroughly." Daniel shrugged. "Well, unless your system missed something, this guy either wiped his past or someone else did it for him." Monroe's jaw tightened. "Then we have our first lead." Daniel exhaled. What had he just gotten himself into? One thing was clear. This was no longer just about the night of the storm. He wasn't just helping anymore. He was hunting a traitor.